Part 2. Part 2. The Truth About the Lie. Madeline McCann. 2 weeks ago, there was a radical change in the investigation. Tiny traces of blood were found in the apartment. When you heard that the police had found blood in the apartment, how did you react?
Do you know what? This is all investigation, and you need to speak to the police. It's just, all your questions are about the investigation, and we can't comment on them.
Jerry, no.
We can't answer questions about this investigation.
I asked about your reaction.
Speculation.
Your feeling. Just your feeling.
So that you can then stick to the official line.
He's too off. Give him a minute. He's a bit hot. Go and get some fresh air. Nah, don't worry.
This is the turnaround in the investigation. The abduction theory becomes less likely than the child's death. The parents, friends and relatives become suspects. The hypothesis that little Madeline is dead has somehow gained some consistency. The collected samples are sent to an expert lab in the UK, the Forensic Science Service, in Birmingham. The analysis results start being targeted by speculation. The Times is the first newspaper to announce that some of the preliminary results of the analysis on some of the collected material didn't match Maddie's DNA, prompting a denial from the lab.
We're just very surprised that they've come out with this stuff. We have no results at all at the moment. We're not sure what's been released by the newspapers. It was the Times newspaper which started claiming that they had some results.
Journalist Duarte Levy was one of the authors of this article. He asserts that there were other preliminary reports that identified Madeline's blood in the samples, and that were put aside. For the Times I say we because I worked with Paulo Reis and David Brown. The first article that we wrote was about the blood traces that had been found on the apartment's wall, and we published that the blood was not Madeline's. It was an article that raised some problems, in terms of the FSS's organization, but that didn't prevent us from accessing other preliminary and final reports. At a given time, we had access to a report that was signed by more than 10 FSS professionals, which stated the existence of a correspondence of 17 out of 19 alleles in the case of Madeline McCann. To us, there was more than enough data to state that this was Madeline's blood. In order to understand the analysis that were made, we went to the Forensics Institute in Coimbra, where presently similar analysis are carried out, using the low copy number method. When the samples were collected at the Ocean Club apartment, and from the car that had been rented by the McCanns, they were sent to the lab, where the samples were then prepared. Later on, the DNA quantity that existed in the collected material was evaluated. Because the quantity was very small, the low copy number method was used. The samples were increased, and then the DNA markers were signaled. This method has the advantage of working with very small amounts of DNA, but the results don't always allow for a clear comparison between the victim's DNA and the collected one. By artificially increasing the DNA quantity for analysis, we also amplify a set of data that can be confused with the markers. The final report that the FSS delivers to the investigation is not conclusive. It establishes that the collected samples may be from Madeline McCann, but there is no certainty. The most significant is the material that was collected from the car that had been rented 23 days after the child's disappearance. The preliminary reports mention a correspondence of 15 alleles out of 16, but the problem is that the analysis demonstrates that the material didn't come from one sole donor, but from at least 3. Professor Corte Real, who met with the FSS experts and saw the British scientists' reports and work notes, explains this issue. When those 15 alleles are included in a mix, where beyond those 15 we can have another 30 or 40 alleles, That means that it includes biological material from several persons. And there it can be much more difficult, much more inconclusive, because we may have a mixture from several persons, including hypothetically, if that happens, we may have several persons from the same family, and that may even give us the idea, in a way, that a certain missing person may be included, and that is not conclusive. Despite the conclusions of the FSS reports, the investigative team's conviction is not based exclusively on scientific evidence. A normal procedure within criminal investigations, which is explained to us by a reputed forensics medicine expert. Criminal investigation is not only one aspect. The whole way of being, in terms of the suspect's attitudes and behavior, are fundamental. As fundamental as the biological analysis of blood, urine, or any other situation. There are other elements that allow for corroboration. The McCanns are summoned for deposition at the police judiciary in Portimao. During that interrogation, they were made arguidos. Kate McCann refuses to answer all of the questions, and Gerald McCann repeatedly denies the investigator's conclusions, defending his innocence and his wife's. Today Kate and Jerry McCann were made arguidos. Their behavior was a distant behavior. For example, when they, especially Gerald McCann, when they are shown the dog's movie, he didn't even want to look at the television, saying that it had no value, and that it didn't show proof of his daughter's death, and that to him, his daughter was alive. When the McCanns leave the police judiciary, the Portuguese public opinion starts to turn against them. The Portuguese and British investigators are now convinced that the little girl was the victim of an accident. She died in the apartment and someone made the body disappear. That was assumed by the entire investigation team, which consisted of Portuguese and English elements. In September 2007, that is the major conclusion drawn from the investigation. I remind you, concerning that issue of inconclusive tests, that there is an ongoing case in the US involving a mother and a missing 3-year-old, where there is also cadaver odor in the car boot, and an incomplete DNA profile of the child, and the mother has been arrested for trial, or has already been tried.
There's currently a ludicrous suggestion that blood was found in a hire car that they hired 25 days after Madeline was taken. And that's been put to Kate, and it's been suggested that she is in some way connected with the death of her daughter, which is clearly ridiculous.
The investigation's change of direction prompts the McCanns' return to the UK. The family that had always refused to abandon Portugal without clarifying their daughter's disappearance, decides to return home. The images of the McCann family's return go around the world. When he sees this image of Gerald McCann carrying one of the twins, Irishman Martin Smith says he recognizes in the stance and the manner of holding the child, the man whom he crossed on the night that Madeline disappeared. He goes to the local police, and gives a statement. It was exactly the same manner and appearance of the man that he saw on the night that Maddie disappeared. The McCann family's representative, a former spokesman for English Prime Minister Gordon Brown, pushes all suspicions aside.
During that time, I saw or heard nothing that gave me cause for concern or any suspicion. All I witnessed was a loving family that had been plunged into a dreadful situation, and two parents trying to cope amidst their loss. To suggest that they somehow harmed Madeline, accidentally or otherwise, is as ludicrous as it is nonsensical. Indeed, it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious.
Kate McCann's diary, which was accessed by the investigation, is clear about the importance of such political support. Gordon Brown phones the couple several times, as the diary shows on the 23rd of May. The disarmed investigation. The McCann case has always worried both countries' political authorities, even leading Prime Minister Gordon Brown to speak about it with his counterpart, José Sócrates, during the Lisbon summit. The British press repeatedly attacked the Portuguese investigation. Following a reply from Goncalo Amaral to a former British detective, in an interview to News Diaries, the Portugal Police's national director dismissed the investigations coordinator with the Justice Minister's support. I'm not going to comment on that matter. But you confirm he was replaced in the process? Yes. Substituted in the directory. Why? I can't comment on that now. Was it because of the statements that were published today? It's an act that belongs to the national director of the Portuguese police judiciary, that I approve. Did you influence this dismissal? I don't want to say anything further about this matter. Goncalo Amaral is sent back to the directory of Faro, and forced to abandon the McCann case investigation. Before I left, someone came to me, I'm not saying who, with a speech about investigations that don't end. Investigations that don't end in the way that we desire, that do not succeed, and that if this investigation was archived or if the investigation was dropped, nobody would question it much, or raise any problems about it. Paulo Rebelo is nominated to direct the investigation. He hurries to visit Aldeia de Luz and to observe the locations where Madeline McCann disappeared from, showing his intention to carry out the process until its end. A set of rogatory letters are sent to the UK for the interrogation of the witnesses in the process. There is an attempt to schedule a reenactment. Some witnesses are never questioned again in Portugal, like the Smith family, who said they saw Gerald McCann carrying a child in his arms, toward the sea, at around 10 p.m. on the 3rd of May 2007. The witness who lived near the McCann's second home in Aldeia de Luz, who says she witnessed an uncommon fact about the McCann's rented car, where the dogs detected cadaver odor and remains that may belong to Maddie, was not heard either. The neighbor has signed a document authorizing the broadcast of her deposition that identifies her, but fearing threats and pressures, she doesn't show her face. This is an interesting matter. When I left the Criminal Investigation Department in Portimao, in October 2007, nothing was known about this vehicle, about this issue of the open car boot. We knew that inside the vehicle cadaver odor and bodily fluids had been found where Madeline McCann's DNA profile was extracted from, with 15 alleles. Months later, there is a jurist, who lives nearby, who came to report that after the McCanns arrived at this villa, they saw the boot open from then on. I drive down this street every day to turn my car around at that end, and every time that I passed the house, and I looked at the car, and the car always had an open boot door, day or night. I often passed at night, and always verified it. It was a fact, I reported it, and that was it. It's important to report the following. That lady, the jurist, was never heard at the Polícia Judiciária because her testimony was not considered to be relevant, which is strange. While she was not heard, while a rogatory letter was sent to England, relatives of Gerald and Kate McCann came out to say that they had transported, inside the car boot, food from the supermarket, namely a meat package that leaked blood. The great question is, how the family heard about the witness, despite the fact that she was not heard by the police in Portugal and tried to reply to the observed facts. Only a few months later, the investigation is closed. Goncalo Amaral resigns from the police, writes a book about the case and accepts to return to 5A at the Ocean Club, to demonstrate his conviction that Madeline McCann died inside this apartment on the 3rd of May 2007. The family's spokesman accuses him of being an opportunist, who is merely interested in making money.
He is publishing a book to make money, and all of this publicity surrounding it is being watched. Every word he says is being studied very closely by lawyers for Kate and Jerry. He is doing this to make money out of Madeline's situation, and if he has clues in the book, he should have acted on those when he was an officer involved in the case to find Madeline.
Contrary to what Mr. Clarence Mitchell says, I used my knowledge in the investigation, and thus can state with all certainty that Madeline was not abducted. Just verify the location of the facts, like we are going to, right away. Final evidence. With the help from one of the major experts from the scientific police, who worked for the judiciary police, Alexander Simus, Goncalo Amaral intends to prove, first, that it was impossible for the child to be abducted, starting by demonstrating that the indications prove that the apartment's window and door were not forced. How does one open a door like this, without a key? This type of apartment door, normally there are only three possibilities. To extract the lock's cannon, which didn't happen, or it would have been reported, a false key, a copy or one that was used without permission. Or using a malleable material, as long as it's not locked, it's introduced, and it makes the lock go back inside. But when it goes in, even if it did, it would hit this screw. If it hits the screw, no matter how much I force it, it doesn't jump to open the lock for me. If the door wasn't opened without a key, the window doesn't bear any traces of having been forced either. These windows have a very good characteristic to check if they were forced or not. Being made of lacquered aluminum, any screwdriver, any instrument that is used to make the lock jump, immediately leaves a mark. What we can see here, there is no break-in. The mark that is there belongs to the lock itself as it rotates. Sometimes one does this with the lock in place, and it hits there. So, to open this window, all we have to do is this. To close it, it's impossible, because either one has a magnet on his fingers to pull the window. Another important fact is revealed by the fingerprints that are left on the bedroom window, which the McCanns insist they left closed, and is supposedly found open when the mother notices her daughter is missing. The only fingerprints that are found belong to Kate McCann and reveal that they were made by opening the window. These three indications mean that there was no abduction, and that is proved. No abductor entered apartment 5A through the door or through the window. Finally, it was impossible for anyone to leave with the child through the window on his own, without supporting himself on the bed, and leaving traces of dragging on the window. In this case, the window is already open, I have to walk through here, and then I have to place my feet here, I can't. We tried to prove this difficulty, taking a child through the window, keeping everything the way it was found. The beds, without a trace of being stepped on, and no signs of dragging on the windowsill. It seems to be practically impossible for one single abductor, like the one Jane Tanner saw, carrying the child on the street. Let's review. First, the front door and the window were not forced open. Second, the window was opened by the mother. Third, it's impossible for a lone abductor to carry out the child without leaving traces on the beds and on the window. Adding this to the traces that were detected by the dogs, and the sightings that were made by the Smiths, we have a completely different probable scenario. Madeline McCann died in apartment 5A and her body was concealed. What do these leads tell us? What means, that which the dogs detected, and what can be established about what happened on the 3rd of May 2007? It is behind the sofa, in front of the middle section of the window, that cadaver odor and human blood where Madeline McCann's profile is traced. It's the only place inside the apartment where the findings coincide. Human cadaver odor and blood. So, within a policeman's logic, this is where death may have taken place. What happened to Maddie? There is a hypothesis that can explain all known clues. The child woke up at night, heard her father talking below the living room window. Climbed on the sofa. fell and hit her head. The fall, and the possible use of Calpol on the children, by the parents, to keep them asleep while they dined, may have provoked Madeline's death. The habit of using Calpol on the children was confirmed by Kate's father. Later, a man, whom the Smiths identified as Gerald McCann, carried the child towards the beach. What I know tells me that Madeline McCann died in apartment 5A on the 3rd of May 2007. I am certain that this truth will be established someday. The investigation was brutally interrupted, and a political and hurried archiving took place. There are some people who hide the truth, but sooner or later the varnish will crack and the revelations will appear. Only then will there be justice for Madeline McCann. The mystery persists. The former inspector believes that someday the truth will be known. For the time being, all we know is that on the 3rd of May 2007, Madeline McCann disappeared in Praia de Luz. She was 3 years old and she was a happy child. Many thanks to Inspector Goncalo Amaral.